Our hero starts out like any other manhwa protagonist. He dies. To give some context, he was fighting a calamity known as the Liquidator, and not even humanity's greatest heroes could leave a scratch on that thing. Then he ends up returning to the past, and that's exactly where our story begins. Of course, leave a like and enjoy the video. The story begins on a dark and devastated battlefield. Amidst the chaos, one of the soldiers commented that the group was close to reaching their objective. However, it became clear that he would not live to see the end of that fight. His chest was brutally pierced by an enemy attack, and as he fell to the ground, he began to lament not having accomplished anything meaningful to understand the situation. It was necessary to go back in time. Suddenly, an unknown threat known only as the Liquidator appeared and destroyed much of the continent. In response, humanity formed a special force to fight back. Among the main members were Brian Miller, the shield that protected the world, Bella Albright, a sage of immense knowledge, Jacob Bloomfield, the divine archer, and Amy White, the sword saint. In addition to them, there were also the support units, but they had no prestige at all, composed only of ordinary soldiers sent to die. One of them was the protagonist of the story, Gray, a simple warrior who now found himself in the midst of total collapse. While reflecting on the battle, Gray realized that the heroes were on a much higher level. However, even with such strength, the gap between them and the enemy was far too great. The power the Liquidator displayed was so extreme that it cast doubt on the actual usefulness of the support units. It felt as though they had been fighting all along for nothing. The enemy himself seemed invulnerable, and the heroes' attacks had no effect at all. It soon became evident that the Liquidator had been toying with them from the beginning. One by one, even the greatest warriors were defeated, easily sliced in half. Despair overtook Gray, for he understood that there was no chance of victory in that scenario. And the strangest thing was that he was still conscious, even after being pierced through the chest. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice called his name, saying it had finally found him, referring to him as the bearer of a great power. Soon after, Gray was transported to a mysterious space filled with pillars and stars, as if he were inside a vast universe. When he turned around, he saw the presence of a strange creature that began to explain the situation. He had not died, and his wounds were already healed. But it was not that entity who had saved him. In fact, Gray's own body had activated a hidden power that exceeded even the creature's comprehension. This mysterious power could, in theory, rival that of the Liquidator, as long as Gray learned to control it. Even so, the creature did not promise any kind of victory. On the contrary, it went straight to the point and pierced Gray's chest once again, which was almost comical, considering it was the second time in just a few minutes he had been struck in the same spot. Despite the brutal gesture, the attack was not intended to kill him. On the contrary, the creature had transferred a portion of its power into him. With that, Gray returned to reality, already with his new power activated. It was not visible to others, but could be perceived by those watching the story through his eyes. And then, something unexpected happened. Gray's attack actually had an effect. The Liquidator, for the first time, seemed surprised and spoke directly to the protagonist. Sensing that there was a small chance, Gray rushed toward the enemy with a flurry of desperate strikes. However, the result was brutal. This time, instead of just being pierced, his entire body was split in two. The Liquidator simply laughed at the attempt and said it had been fun, but it was time to leave. Still, who said the battle was over? At the exact moment the Liquidator turned his back, Lee summoned a gigantic sword as powerful as those capable of nullifying magic. The level of power was absurd. Even the Liquidator, surprised, questioned whether the man before him was still truly human, but not even Lee knew the answer. Despite the impact, Lee realized the strike was still not enough to kill the enemy, so he charged once more and delivered another blow to make sure. This time, the attack seemed to work, but it came at a bad time. Suddenly, the Liquidator unleashed a power so colossal that he managed to pull the moon toward Earth, turning day into night. Even without understanding what was happening, Lee did not retreat. He continued attacking with all his might, but his blows no longer reached the target. The Liquidator explained that as long as he remained in that plane, he was practically invincible. Right after that, without any warning, he launched a star at Lee's body, reducing it to dust. It was an attempt at total annihilation, since if Lee's body could regenerate, turning it to dust would be the only way to stop it. But even that wasn't enough to kill him. A new power was activated at the last moment. This time, it was the power of an even stranger entity called Kronos, immediately recognized by the Liquidator, who began cursing and yelling at the gods, probably relatives of Kronos. None of it helped. The power that awakened was enough to send Lee back in time. At first, Lee didn't believe what was happening, but when he looked around, he recognized his homeland. He was in the village of Renabo, a place that had been destroyed 15 years ago. Standing before it, alive and intact, he finally understood that he had truly returned to the past. Excited by the discovery, his joy was cut short by a pain in his arm. He remembered being bullied by some boys back then, including one named Belder, which showed that even in the past he had already been considered a loser. It was frustrating to realize that, despite everything, he was still weak. And now, with an apocalyptic future to stop, how could he face the Liquidator if he couldn't even stand up to village bullies? Even after awakening a new power, Lee still didn't want to get hurt and lacked confidence. Sometime later, while walking alone through the forest, he ran into Belder again. The encounter was was direct and aggressive. Without giving time for conversation, Belder threw a sword at him. Saying they would have a mock fight, Lee tried to refuse, but Belder wouldn't let him. He said the blades weren't sharp and there was no danger. Even so, Lee tried to argue that he didn't want to fight, but it was already too late. Belder rushed at him without hesitation. Faced with this, Lee panicked. He shouted that he couldn't even hold a sword because of an arm injury he'd had since childhood, that only reinforced the thought he carried deep in his chest. From the very beginning, he seemed destined to be a failure. But while saying he couldn't hold a sword, Lee surprisingly managed to dodge the blow. It didn't make sense at first. Either Belder's attacks were getting slower, or somehow Lee had become faster. The truth was that even in a younger body without trained physical strength, he still retained all the combat memories from his past life. Using that advantage, he quickly disarmed Belder, which made it clear that at least against these local opponents, he wouldn't suffer like before. Following that reasoning, Lee told himself he didn't need to worry anymore, because he had learned that as long as he wielded that blunt blade, there was no risk of seriously hurting anyone. That gave him the freedom to fight without fear. However, when he made his next strike, which was only supposed to deliver a light blow, the blade actually cut Belder for real. That scared Lee, because in theory, the sword wasn't sharp and shouldn't have caused any wounds. Faced with the situation, and already a bit annoyed, Lee stepped forward and struck Belder hard in the face, launching him away with a single blow. As he approached again, he questioned the exaggerated screams, reminding Belder that he was the one who had said the sword didn't cut, so he had no reason to complain. The shock and humiliation left Belder desperate. Not knowing what to do, he entered full disorganized villain mode and called his friends for help. They tried to attack Lee, but he just smiled. In the next scene, they were all completely defeated, lying on the ground around him. Taking advantage of the moment, Lee asked if they happened to be from a dojo called Saria Sword Belder, confirmed, explaining that it was only possible to enter with a recommendation. He also mentioned that they had left the place because they had become strong enough, but Lee, with a direct gaze, stated that they were far from being strong enough. Setting that aside, Lee asked Belder to recommend him to the dojo, but he hesitated, saying he couldn't. He explained that if he told his master he lost to a stranger and then came asking for a recommendation, it would be far too embarrassing. Even so, after seeing Lee's skills clearly and, let's say, convincingly demonstrated, Belder ended up agreeing by sheer pressure. Already at the city gate, Belder asked why Lee wanted to enter a dojo so badly. He replied that every dojo has at least one recommendation slot for the main academy. His goal was to earn that spot and enter the academy. One of Belder's companions commented that Gray's swordsmanship was good enough to guarantee his direct entry without needing a recommendation. But Gray knew it wasn't that simple. Even if he seemed strong now, he remembered in his past life how the most powerful warriors of humanity were defeated with a single blow from the Liquidator. At the end of that life, he had managed to do something with the mysterious power that awakened within him. But even so, it wasn't enough. Knowing this, he understood that he needed to grow much stronger. That chance to go back in time was the only way to completely change the course of history. Of course, it wasn't as if there was no hope. In the final moments of his past life, Gray had managed to control that dark power thanks to the teachings he received from the Sword Saint that showed that if he trained in swordsmanship until he reached the same level as the former heroes, perhaps the outcome of that battle against the Liquidator could be completely different. Putting that memory aside, as soon as they arrived at the dojo, trouble already began. Master Saria was scolding her disciples for attacking someone unarmed and still getting beaten up. She was introduced as the head instructor of the Saria Sword Dojo. Belder even tried to make up some excuse, but got slapped so hard he was sent flying. Saria made it clear that if what her disciples called training meant attacking a defenseless person, then what she had just done to them was also a form of training. Even so, she did not forgive them. She took the moment to announce that all of them were expelled from the dojo, and from that moment on, none of them should call her master again. With that, the background characters left, ashamed and speechless. After the incident, Saria approached Gray and apologized for the misunderstanding. She had heard that he wanted a letter of recommendation to enter the academy. She said she could do that as an apology, but first she needed to confirm his sword skills. Gray accepted without hesitation. When the duel began, Saria's first impressions were of surprise. His technique was unrefined, but extremely effective. Fighting him felt like facing someone who had been through countless real battles. Sometimes he seemed self-taught, other times like someone trained by a true master. In the end, he was a raw diamond. But something unexpected happened. When Saria tried to end the fight, she realized she couldn't. Gray kept up with all her movements. She, an experienced instructor, was being forced to fight with everything she had against someone who was, in theory, just a student. To make things worse, she began to feel fear. The boy standing before her was not normal. In a decisive moment, Gray delivered a strange blow that forced her to retreat several meters. She was surprised by the impact, but tried to seize the opening to strike back. However, before she could make a move, she noticed her sword had been split in half. And the worst part, she hadn't even realized when it happened. Gray, on his end, noticed he had managed to activate that strange power again. The sensation was the same as before, but this time it came with recoil. His body couldn't keep up with the power that had been released, and he could barely stand. Even so, he insisted that he was fine. Then came the question, should he tell Saria about the power? He thought for a moment, but decided it was better not to. After all, it was a force he couldn't even control, so there was no point in explaining something he himself didn't understand. From Saria's side, the shock was obvious. She knew it wasn't possible to cut a wooden sword using another wooden sword without a blade. The fact that Gray didn't say anything about what happened made it clear that he was hiding something. Even so, setting the mystery aside, Saria asked again if he truly wanted a recommendation for the academy. She explained that it was the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship, an extremely demanding place. But to his surprise, she said Gray was still not ready to go there. Upon hearing that, Gray was not too surprised. He already expected that his strength would not be enough. However, he had rushed to assume the verdict would be negative. Saria continued and explained that, in reality, the place he should aim for was not just the best academy in the kingdom, but the Unified World Academy, recognized as the best in the world. It was exactly from there that those legendary heroes who fought the Liquidator in the final battle had come. Faced with that, Gray was stunned and asked how it could be possible for someone like him to be accepted into such a place. Saria answered directly that, for now, it was impossible, and she knew Gray had already realized that. His body was still far from being that of a true swordsman. If it were the Royal Academy, with effort and dedication, he might have had a chance, but the World Academy demanded something on a completely different level. According to her, in his current condition, he wouldn't even pass the first stage of the entrance exam. Internally, Gray had to agree. Everyone who came out of that academy was treated like a monster, warriors on a completely different tier. Even so, when Saria saw the look on his face, she asked if he was already giving up, even though there were still 5 months left until the exam. She knew the time might not be enough, but she wanted him to trust her completely. At the same time, she made it clear that he had to be prepared to suffer a lot during those 5 months. It would be a physical and mental hell. And with those words, Gray understood that if he didn't fight now, he would never get another chance. So in the end, he accepted the challenge. And it truly was hell. Every day he was forced to eat strange food, go through exhausting training as soon as he woke up, and even when he was about to sleep, time passed. The days piled up, and 8 months went by. By that point, Gray had completely transformed. His body was strong, and his swordsmanship was much more refined. According to Saria, she had nothing left to teach him. He was well conditioned, and with 1 month left until the exam, she recommended that he travel early to the test site to get used to the environment. As a bonus, Saria even gave him some money so he could enjoy the trip and explore the region. Faced with all that, Gray joked that from the way she was acting, it seemed like she just wanted to get rid of him. Saria immediately denied it, saying that wasn't the case at all. But Gray, with a more serious look, commented that he had heard rumors of an ogre nest nearby, and that the village was nearly unguarded. Upon hearing this, Saria's expression changed. She tried to brush it off, and said it had nothing to do with anything, after all. Reinforcements would come from the royal capital, and they had nothing to worry about. Even so, the atmosphere shifted. Something felt off, and Gray began to suspect that there was more to this farewell than just concern about the academy entrance exam. Deep down, Gray began to reflect that Saria was lying. He knew the future, and because of that, he was certain no help would come to that village. Even worse, he knew that shortly before the complete destruction of that place, Saria would lose her life, and when that happened, they would never find her again. Faced with that reality, Gray simply said that it was fine, and that he would be leaving. He thanked his master for everything she had done for him. However, when night fell, Saria went to the location where the ogre's nest was. Following a trail of blood, she was sure she was on the right path, but was suddenly caught off guard by a voice asking where she was going. When she looked ahead, she saw Gray standing there. She immediately wanted to know what he was doing in that place, since he was supposedly on his way to the academy. But Gray explained that he had stayed a bit longer in the village just to confirm whether the royal troops would actually help. However, just as Saria herself had said, they could not intervene due to an urgent matter. That was why she had decided to act on her own. According to her, it was possible because she had received a report from the scout saying there was only one elite ogre at the location, with no other monsters present. A single elite ogre was something she could handle on her own. However, Gray knew very well that the true strength of ogres lay in their intelligence and leadership capabilities. Therefore, facing an entire nest alone was practically suicide. He was fully aware that if he let his master go alone, she would die, just as she had before. Because of that, Gray asked to accompany Saria, but she immediately refused. Still, he insisted, saying that he needed combat experience and that this was a great opportunity to learn. He asked if she saw him as a burden. Upon hearing that, Saria replied that he certainly was not a burden. The problem was that in battle, especially in a newly formed nest, anything could happen. Even with her strength, she could not guarantee anyone's safety. Seeing that she kept refusing, Gray said that if she did not take him with her, he would fight her, knock her unconscious, and face the ogres alone. Faced with such a kind proposal, Saria ended up accepting, but under one condition. He had to come back alive. Gray, in turn, said she also had to promise the same. With everything clarified and the promises made, the two headed toward the nest. Upon arriving there, the first thing they needed to do was stay calm. Ogres had a certain level of intelligence, so acting recklessly could be costly. Observing the area, they soon found several ogres gathered, but none of them seemed to be the leader. Perhaps he was hiding inside one of those tents. Since they could not stay idle, they decided to split up. Saria would attack from one side while Gray advanced from the other. As soon as Saria launched the attack, she drew the attention of several ogres. At that moment, Gray appeared and began to fight alongside her together. They eliminated all the monsters with precision. After the battle, Saria congratulated Gray on his performance and was surprised because it was hard to believe that it had been his first real fight. But Gray remained serious because he found the whole thing strange. The monsters were too weak. He could not understand how, in his previous life, his master had died in that very place. While thinking about it, Gray looked toward one of the tents and saw two glowing eyes in the darkness. Instantly, an instinctive fear took over him, and he shouted that they needed to flee Saria, not understanding the reason, ran with him. However, they were too slow. Suddenly, an elite ogre appeared before them. Saria remarked that it was an honor to have the chief come to them, but Gray responded that it was not the true chief. Behind them, a powerful roar echoed through the area. The sound made all the surrounding ogres grow even stronger. The presence that revealed itself was far more powerful than an elite ogre. It was him, the true commander of that nest, the ogre general. Now, Gray fully understood the reason why his master had died in his previous life. It was not a simple mistake. She had faced the wrong enemy, alone, with no support, and against a force that was not in the report. All of that was happening again, but this time, he was there. And maybe, just maybe, the ending could be different. It was clear that they could not face those monsters head-on. Because of that, Saria tried to strike the elite ogre directly in hopes of creating an escape route. The attack actually worked, and the blow hit its mark. But the problem came right after the ogre regenerated its wound instantly. According to Gray, after the roar from the ogre general, all the monsters had their abilities enhanced, including regeneration and physical strength. After a brief fight, Gray realized that if they continued like that, it would only be a matter of time before they were defeated. Faced with this, he asked his master to hold the rear and buy him a little time. There was only one viable option left at that point: defeat the ogre general. However, to reach that goal, he would need to eliminate every enemy standing between him and the boss. On top of that, there was another problem. His main sword could no longer handle the empowered ogres. He did have a backup sword, and Saria had managed to get him another one, but neither was good enough to take down an entire horde and still face the ogre general. As if that were not enough, the general roared once again, further strengthening the ogres around them. From that moment on, the situation became desperate. With every new enemy, the difficulty increased. Even so, Gray dodged, attacked, and tried to push forward. But it did not take long before the ogres managed to catch up with him. He was hit hard, thrown far, and suffered heavy damage. To make things even worse, now he had only one sword left. And with just that, how could he possibly take on an entire horde and the ogre general? Realizing that he had no more chances, Gray told Saria to run away. However, she refused. It was not because she wanted to stay and die with him. The problem was that her leg had been injured and she could no longer run. Faced with that revelation, despair consumed Gray. He began to think that perhaps he had come back in time, gone through everything again, only to die right there, at the very beginning of his new journey. But after a brief moment of silence, he remembered that he still had one last card up his sleeve. If he used that special power he had manifested the last time, everything could change. Even those monsters that seemed impossible to defeat could be destroyed. Focusing and recalling the sensation he had felt on that occasion, Gray summoned that overwhelming power. In an instant, he cut down all the ogres in front of him with ease. The attack was so absurd that Saria, even injured, asked what was going on, but Gray assured her that everything was under control. The power he used was so strong that it not only defeated all the ogres, but also split the ogre general in half with a single blow. With the general's death, the other ogres lost the magical reinforcement that had been empowering them. This immediately made the battle easier for Saria, who took advantage of the opening to slice the elite ogre into 3 pieces with a precise strike. And so, together, the two of them managed to eliminate every ogre in that nest. Gray started to apologize for having broken his master's backup sword, but Saria told him it was all right. The moment he handed the broken blade back to her, his body could no longer endure, and he simply collapsed, completely unconscious. Inside his mind, Gray found himself in front of a massive sealed door. The place felt strange, and the presence sense within was also familiar. He immediately recognized that both the place and the sensation came from the power he had used earlier. It only took a moment of reflection to understand that if he opened that door, he would be able to use that devastating power again. But that was only in theory. The moment he tried to approach the door, he felt an overwhelming sense of death that made him recoil instantly. It was instinctive. He knew for certain that if he touched that door, he would die instantly. While he was thinking about that, a deep voice spoke from within his soul. The voice said that he had made a good choice. Right after that, Gray woke up. The first thing he saw was Saria's face, relieved to see him awake. She explained that he was in the village infirmary and that he had been unconscious for 5 whole days. Upon hearing that, Gray remarked that it seemed he had overexerted himself. However, when he remembered the strength of that final attack, he began to think that overexertion might not fully explain what had happened. He tried to move his body and quickly realized he had no strength in his right arm. On top of that, his bruise was turning into strange marks, symbols that appeared disconnected and meaningless. And apparently, only Gray could see them. Ignoring that for the moment, the more urgent issue was that he could not move his arm. The reason became clear when he was informed that all the bones in his arm had been shattered into many pieces. Even so, he felt no pain, which was strange. Soraya explained that they had treated his arm with a high-level magic potion, something extremely rare and expensive. Though surprised by the explanation, Gray became even more confused upon learning that the potion had been given to them by the village chief himself. He could not understand why anyone would give such a precious item to him. When he voiced that question, Surya simply replied that he was the hero of the village. Before Gray could organize his thoughts, the village chief appeared in person, showing both concern and relief to see him awake. Gray tried to thank him for the potion, but the chief said it was the least they could do. After all, they had defeated an ogre general, a monster that even the combined forces of nearby cities had failed to injure in the past. Because of that, offering a rare potion like that was the bare minimum for what Gray had done for them. Gray still thought the chief might be exaggerating, but remembering his previous life, he knew the village had truly been destroyed by that ogre attack. This time, the story had changed. Putting those thoughts aside, the chief then mentioned he had heard rumors that Gray would be attempting the admission exam for the Unified World Academy. Upon hearing that, Gray was struck by reality. It had already been a week since the start of the battle against the ogres, and he had spent 5 days unconscious. Since the journey to the Unified World Academy took 3 days, that meant he was in serious trouble. There were only 2 days left before the exam began, and he simply did not have enough time. Sure, he could make it on time if he used a fast horse, but the problem was the cost. Renting or buying such an animal required a lot of money, and he had nothing. However, before Gray could even ask for help, the village chief anticipated the situation. He said he already knew that Gray would need a horse, so he had arranged for the best one the village had. Furthermore, according to Saria, if Gray had not woken up in time, they would have taken him unconscious anyway, just to ensure he had a chance at the exam. When Gray finally left the infirmary, he was surprised. The entire village had gathered outside next to the horse prepared to take him. All the villagers were there, thanking him and calling him the hero of the village. To his surprise, the villagers themselves had collected money and gave it to him. They knew the academy's entrance fee was high and wanted to ensure he had the opportunity to apply. That gesture touched Gray deeply, and he thanked them with all his heart, though he joked that if he failed the exam, it would be hard to come back there afterward. But Saria reassured him. She said he had nothing to worry about, because none of the academy's candidates had ever defeated an ogre general before. That alone put him in a different league. Gray, however, reminded her that his arm was still useless, and even though he had his left hand, he doubted he could pass the test in that condition, especially without using that strange power he had previously manifested. Even so, Saria insisted that he did not need to push himself. The academy examiners would recognize his talent, even without any flashy displays. To her, Gray already had what it took to be accepted. He did not know if her words were encouragement or just more pressure, but he felt that expectations were only growing heavier. Still, as he looked around him, it became clear that something had already changed. That village, which in his previous life had been destroyed, was now alive, and that was only possible because of the power he carried. It proved that the future could be changed, that he could rewrite fate with his own hands. The next day, riding the horse he had received as a gift, Gray set out for the academy. Thanks to the animal's speed, he arrived just in time. As soon as he entered the territory of the Unified World Academy, he felt as though he were stepping into an anthill, given the sheer number of people present. It was a sea of candidates, all gathered with the same goal in mind, securing a place. Conversations quickly started buzzing from all directions. In short, what people were saying was that the number of available spots changed every year. In some years, 50 spots were open. In others, only 1. While the candidates chatted among themselves, trying to understand what would happen next, a red-haired woman appeared suddenly. Without saying anything at first, she simply snapped her fingers and instantly cast a powerful spell. In front of each participant, a floating piece of paper appeared containing only 2 pieces of information: the candidate's number and the course to which they had been assigned. She then explained that this procedure was standard every year. There was no need to worry about names, birth dates, or backgrounds. The Unified World Academy did not discriminate based on age, gender, nationality, social status, or any other external factor. In fact, not even the candidate's name mattered at that point. The Academy only cared about a student's name after they had passed the exams. Until then, what mattered was the number and the course. Gray, upon looking at his paper, felt a bit startled to see he had been assigned to the swordsmanship course, especially since his right arm was still unusable, and he did not even have his main sword. It felt like a cruel decision. However, as if reading his thoughts, the red-haired woman clarified that the courses had been assigned based solely on each candidate's physical appearance. She said that if she had made any mistake, they only needed to raise a hand and speak up. No one did. The hall remained in complete silence, which suggested that, as strange as it seemed, seemed her selections were accurate. After the explanation, she added one more detail to the papers: the date and time of each candidate's exam. In Gray's case, his test was scheduled for the first day at 11 in the morning. That made him extremely anxious, as he had hoped for more time for his arm to heal. But the instructor made it clear that delays would not be tolerated. If a candidate failed to appear at the exact time, they would be automatically disqualified. There was also no possibility of changing the exam schedule. Given that, Gray realized he could only hope for the best and pray that his arm would be better by the next day. Unfortunately, when he woke up the following morning, nothing had improved. His right arm was still useless, and he would have to face the combat exam in that condition. Even without being in peak form, he knew he could not afford to be pessimistic. At the very least, his left arm still worked, and he would have to do his best with what he had. With some time to spare before the call, Gray decided to observe the other candidates' fights. He wanted to see how the exams worked, looking for any weaknesses or loopholes he could exploit. However, the moment he saw the first demonstration, he grew even more tense. A candidate charged at full speed toward the examiner, delivering a strong, direct attack, but the examiner dodged with ease. The opponent tried a few more strikes, but was completely overwhelmed. With just two simple moves, the examiner launched the challenger out of the arena, ending the match in humiliating fashion. Seeing that left Gray deeply shaken, his confidence began to crumble. How could he defeat someone like that in his current condition, with his dominant arm broken and a low-quality backup sword? Even so, there was no time for doubt or regret. His turn had come. He stepped into the arena, feeling the weight of expectation and uncertainty. He knew he was at a disadvantage, but even so, he would do everything he could with what he had left. Luckily for him, the examiner allowed him to take the initiative. This could be an advantage if he used the opportunity wisely. Even without full confidence, Gray gathered all his resolve. With his left arm, a weak sword, and a courage that bordered on desperation, he prepared to give his best. From what he remembered of Surya's teachings, a sword was not meant to be swung with just the arms, but with the movement of the entire body. However, in that situation, Gray had no choice but to channel all his strength into his single working arm, trying to strike as best he could. His attacks were clumsy and isolated, driven by effort in one muscle alone without harmony with the rest of his body. As soon as he launched the first strike, the examiner easily dodged, showing that such technique would not work there. But in the moment the examiner counterattacked, Gray noticed something curious. The opponent's movements seemed slow. They did not compare to Surya's speed, who had been his reference in combat. Still, the examiner possessed overwhelming strength, and even if Gray managed to block some of the attacks, he could clearly feel the difference in power. With this perception in mind, Gray realized that the fight might be less difficult than he had imagined. Taking advantage of the opening, he launched a rapid sequence of attacks. This caught the examiner off guard, while Gray recalled his master's encouraging words, spoken with conviction. That he would certainly pass, that memory stirred his spirit. Hearing such a firm statement from someone as beautiful as Surya made Gray even more excited. The fight continued. Even though he had already understood the basics of the examiner's movements, the difference in strength was still too great. That made it impossible for Gray to break his opponent's stance or solid guard. However, over time, the examiner's strikes began to lose rhythm. His movements grew more uncoordinated, and it was in that moment that an opportunity appeared. As the examiner lunged for another attack, Gray dodged it. He was ready to counter with precision, but a voice interrupted him, telling him to stop. The fight was over. The exam's time limit had been reached, and the result was declared a draw. Gray felt disappointed. Even though he had given his all, a draw felt like too little. Still, there was always next year. He knew that by then his arm would be healed and he would have new chances. So he simply thanked them and accepted the result with humility. A week later, in meeting room number 53, an evaluators gathering was underway. An old man, likely the academy director, wanted to know how the exams had gone so far. Several teachers took the chance to complain about the current test format, arguing that observing one candidate at a time was inefficient given the overwhelming number of participants. But the director cut to the point and said he wanted their opinions about the students, not the evaluation system. To move things along, he started by asking about the swordsmanship course. According to the records, the candidates who passed were numbers 5, 217, and 753. Others had also fought well, but lacked the preparation needed to keep up with the advanced classes. The director asked if anyone else had stood out, but none of the evaluators mentioned any names. The meeting was about to end when suddenly a red-haired girl interrupted and asked about candidate number 513. That was when the teachers decided to quickly review the footage of that candidate's fight against the examiner. After a brief analysis, they remarked that if the young man relied too heavily on traps to win his battles, he would struggle with future challenges. Even though he had shown effort and intelligence, his style still seemed too limited for the level required there. His technique was decent, but he still lacked a lot of strength. In the end, summing up the evaluator's conclusion, Gray was deemed unfit. Upon hearing those remarks, the red-haired girl ironically commented that if everyone there was that that blind, then maybe it really was a waste to maintain a system where all candidates were judged collectively. The next day, the official announcement of those accepted into the swordsmanship course was made. As expected, number 5, 217, and several others were selected, but number 513, Gray himself, was not mentioned. That left him completely stunned. In the end, he had failed. However, before he could spiral into his own thoughts, a new announcement was made, this time regarding a special admission called Divine Eye. That was when Gray's name appeared, leaving him even more confused. He didn't quite understand what that meant. While he tried to make sense of it, murmurs began to spread. Some students started laughing and implying that someone had pulled strings to get in. That made Gray even more uncomfortable, as he had no idea whether his master Saria held any influence within the World Academy. However, his thoughts were interrupted by an old man who explained that, in fact, it was the complete opposite. The Divine Eye special admission was not a favor or manipulation, but rather an honored category created over 100 years ago that had produced countless heroes of humanity. Though old, it was still held in great respect. The old man named a few candidates who had been admitted through that same method in recent years: Amy White, Bella Albright, Brian Miller, and Jacob Bloomfield. Those were exactly the same heroes of humanity that Gray had met in the future. In other words, if he had entered the academy through the same type of admission as those iconic figures, it meant that one day his name might also be listed among the greatest heroes in history. Sometime later, the day of the entrance ceremony arrived. All the students were gathered and already wearing their official uniforms, with emblems representing the courses to which they had been accepted. But as soon as they reached the event location, they were informed by a white-haired man that there would be a slight delay due to final preparations. For that reason, he politely asked everyone to step back a little. Once the area was cleared, the man with white hair summoned a massive teleportation portal. From within it emerged an enormous structure, reminiscent of the Roman Colosseums of ancient times. The magic involved in the summoning was so overwhelming that many students were left in shock by the display of power. Gray knew that this was a deliberate move, a way to show everyone the true level of the World Academy. Looking around, he began to notice, along with the comments of other students, that there were far too many chairs set up. The number of seats was absurd compared to the number of accepted students, since by all indications, only about 30 had passed. One student remarked that it looked like there were more than 300, maybe even 3,000 available seats. That was when a girl offered an explanation. The World Union Academy, as its name implied, gathered the best students from across the globe. That ceremony and the grand structure before them were not merely meant to impress the newcomers, but to welcome a much larger group of candidates from various nations and cultures, all brought together in one place to pursue the peak of knowledge and strength. The rest of the students had not yet arrived, but soon after, they came flying in aboard a kind of magical transport that resembled a balloon, though Gray immediately recognized it as the Strato Queen, the magical airship. He remembered that vessel well, for in his previous life, it had been used by the heroes in the battle against the Liquidator. With the arrival of the remaining students, the entrance ceremony could finally begin in earnest. The ceremony unfolded like any other. The headmaster gave a long and traditional speech, filled with formalities and reminders. As expected, they also called forward the top student of each course. For the swordsmanship division, the standout was a boy who had instantly defeated his examiner. His name was Leonhard Appius, though everyone preferred to call him Leon as it was easier. During the speech, Leon asked if he could speak freely, and with the instructor's permission, he began his declaration. The first thing he did was criticize the academy. He said that while some students had passed through merit and effort, among them was someone who did not deserve to be there. He was referring to the Divine Eye special admission system, and more specifically, to the choice made by Ariel, the red-haired girl. Ariel responded calmly, saying that everyone there had gone through rigorous tests, and that even if some were not as strong as others, it was no reason to exclude them. But Leon made it clear he wasn't referring to the normally admitted candidates. According to him, the issue was with the student she had brought in behind the scenes using the special admission. That was when Leon demanded that the student throw the uniform on the ground and leave because he didn't deserve to be at the academy. Hearing this, Gray fully understood the source of Leon's anger. Luckily, he didn't seem to know who Ariel's chosen student actually was. Ariel then remarked that the students were quite spirited that year, and before Leon could say anything else, she provoked him by asking if he really believed he was stronger than the boy she had chosen. Swallowing hard, Leon replied that he did, unless he was mistaken. To test this, Ariel proposed a bet. She would put her own job on the line, along with the spot of the chosen student. This left both Gray and Leon confused, as they did not fully understand. Leon asked if she wanted him to fight the student, but she replied that she would never do something so crude. She said that if her student fought seriously, Leon would probably die. She was not provoking him, she was speaking with total seriousness. Because of that, the bet would be made using monsters, as it would be safer. According to Ariel, Leon was better at fighting monsters than humans, so the test would be the following. Both of them would have to defeat monsters that she would choose as targets. With each round, the monster would get stronger. Whoever failed to defeat it first would lose, and if Ariel's student was defeated, she would step down as a professor, and all the other students she approved in the special admission would also be expelled. If Leonhardt lost the bet, he would have to follow any order Ariel gave, without question. Upon hearing that condition, Leonhardt replied that he might accept, but it would depend on what kind of monsters were involved. He did not want to fall into a silly trap set by someone, so he needed to be sure of what was at stake. Seeing his hesitation, Ariel suggested the first target of the bet should be an ogre general, asking if that challenge would not be too easy for him. Upon hearing that name, the protagonist began wondering why Ariel had chosen that specific monster. On Leonhardt's side, he became irritated, as he knew that kind of creature was not something someone could defeat alone. Ariel, however, explained that she was not asking him to defeat the monster immediately. For that reason, she suggested the time limit for the bet be 1 year, which would be a reasonable time for the challenge. Even with that time, according to Leonhardt, it would still be impossible to face such a monster head-on. However, thinking more deeply, he realized that Ariel was deliberately choosing an enemy that no one could defeat. That way, the bet would end without a clear winner. But upon noticing this line of thinking, Ariel added one more condition to the bet. In case of a draw, both would lose. If Leonhardt, or rather the protagonist himself, lost the battle, they would both suffer the consequences. Faced with this situation, there was no way to refuse Leonhardt. Believed that Ariel had to be crazy, since the bet seemed to have a predetermined outcome. He also demanded that it not be a weakened ogre general or anything like that, to which Ariel replied that was obvious. To ensure everything followed the rules, she created a magic contract that Leonhardt quickly signed, as in his view, the bet was practically won. After all that, some professors began wondering if Ariel might be using the bet as an excuse to retire. Gray, on the other hand, was intrigued as he tried to understand how Ariel knew that the monster he had fought before enrolling had been an ogre general. In addition, he did not understand why she had set exactly 1 year as the deadline for the bet. When he glanced at her, he saw that Ariel only smiled and gestured for silence with her eyes. In truth, the bet had already been decided from the moment she began speaking. After that situation, the classes started quickly. The first would be about the fundamentals of magic, since according to the motto of the World Academy, there was no time to waste. Starting from the basics, the professor explained that everyone possessed an invisible energy called ether, and by manipulating it through the magic circus, it was possible to cast spells and perform a variety of other magical techniques. While listening to the explanation, Gray realized he was able to follow the subject well, as he had already learned this content in his previous life, during training fields. The only problem with that class was that he had ended up in the same group as Leonhardt. That was not exactly a serious issue, since no one there knew that he was the special admission student of the Divine Eye. However, while reflecting on that and glancing quickly toward Leonhardt, the professor noticed the movement and thought he was rolling his eyes. Believing that Gray was being disrespectful or overly confident, the professor reacted as if he thought Gray considered himself too well prepared for the lesson. At that moment, Gray began to explain that, since they were in the swordsmanship course, he thought there would be no problem if they did not use magic. However, the professor made it clear that things did not work that way. He explained that even in close combat, the students would be fighting alongside mages, so the basics of magic needed to be understood. It was essential that everyone had at least a minimum level of knowledge in order to coordinate with spellcasters during real battles. With that explanation, Gray started to understand, more or less, that the professor's intention was to have everyone memorize at least one simple spell to keep up with the mages. Most likely, the first one would be the ether projectile, since it was the most basic of all. Upon hearing that, the professor took the chance to comment that, in that case, Gray should already know how to use that spell, right? Gray replied that he did, all thanks to the time he had spent in training fields during his previous life. The professor saw this as a good opportunity to test that ability in a duel. To everyone's surprise, the chosen opponent was none other than Leonhardt. Nobody really understood the reason for that choice, but Leonhardt thanked him and remarked that, in addition to swordsmanship, he had also been trained in magic. He said he was a bit concerned that he might end up hurting his opponent too much. The professor reassured both of them, stating that Leonhardt only needed to use a weaker version of the spell, and that, in any case, the ether projectile was not that powerful to begin with. Besides, his opponent was none other than the student chosen by Ariel, the famous bearer of the Divine Eye. That revelation surprised many people there, as until then, no one knew about Gray's connection to Ariel. By revealing that so openly, the professor seemed to be acting with a bit of malice, perhaps wanting to provoke or test the boy. Now knowing who his opponent was, was, Leonhardt politely asked Gray to come down from the stands and step into the training field so that they could give the other students a practical lesson. As soon as he reached the center of the yard, Gray began reflecting on his command of magic. He had trained a few times in the past, but even so, he was not sure whether he would be able to cast a spell correctly in that situation. At least he thought he would not die from a simple projectile. When Leonhardt started casting the spell, Gray had to react quickly, because if he did not counterattack, he would end up taking the full hit alone. The two of them then launched the same type of magic at the same time, but the difference between the two spells was enormous. Due to the great difference in size between the attacks, the spell cast by Gray completely engulfed Leonhardt's, immediately putting his life at risk. The situation was so serious that the professor himself had to cast a barrier to contain the impact. Even so, the attack still broke through the protection and hit Leonhardt, leaving everyone in shock. Luckily, he survived, but it was clear that if not for the professor's intervention, he would have died on the spot. According to the professor, that type of attack, an ether projectile, was something no other student in the academy could perform. That is why he was astonished and asked Gray what exactly that spell had been. On Gray's side, he was also confused because Leonhardt's attack had been very weak, clearly different from the magic he knew. He began to wonder if perhaps the spell he had learned in the training field was different from what the academy taught. To clear up the doubt, he directly asked the professor if he had used the correct spell. The professor confirmed that, yes, it really was an ether projectile. However, what set Gray's attack apart was the quality. What he had cast was actually a compressed ether projectile, an extremely advanced technique, difficult even for the academy's professors to perform, and nearly impossible to use in real combat. This meant that Gray was likely the only person in the academy capable of doing such a thing. Even so, Gray found all of it very strange. To him, all the spells taught in the subjugation squad during training were just like that. And the most curious part was that back then, he was considered the worst in the group. With that in mind, he even asked if the professor was joking, because he believed that anyone could do the same with enough practice. However, his comment came off as arrogance, as if he thought he was superior, which made the professor burst out laughing. The professor then suggested that Gray transfer to the magic course and said he would even personally recommend him. However, Gray immediately refused since he preferred swords and felt more comfortable with swordsmanship than with magic. The professor went on to say that the super compressed ether attack Gray had launched was beyond imagination. According to him, Gray might be the greatest talent the academy had ever seen, or even someone above the institution's own level. From the other students' point of view, everyone was as frightened as they were impressed, not only by the attack itself, but also by the number of compliments the professor was giving Gray, since he was known to be extremely strict and rarely praised anyone. Moreover, the professor declared that if Gray did not transfer to the magic course, it would be almost like committing a crime against the magical arts themselves, considering the level of ether compression technique he had demonstrated. Upon hearing the term ether compression, Gray began to remember something from his first life. He recalled a blue-haired woman explaining, in a very technical way, how compression worked. At that time, it was extremely difficult to perform that kind of magic because it involved continuously compressing ether inside the body and then gathering it to use parts of it mixed with a substance called OD. That was when Gray asked the professor if he knew what OD was, but judging by his reaction, it was clear he had no idea what that was. With that, Gray understood that the current world still had no knowledge of OD, which meant that everything he learned in the subjugation squad was, in fact, knowledge from the future. To him, that should have been considered the basics. While reflecting on this, the professor was still trying to convince Gray to change courses. However, once again, he refused, making it clear that his love for swords was greater than any magical gift. Faced with his answer, the professor finally gave up, at least for now. He said that if Gray ever changed his mind in the future, he just needed to look for him. In the end, he asked Gray to return to his seat. He would not mind if Gray turned his face away, got bored, or even left the class, because everything that would be taught there was too simple for someone like him. After the professor's impressive statement, the students began looking at Gray differently. That display of power had not gone unnoticed, and was already causing unexpected reactions. Even Leonhardt, who had been momentarily forgotten, had a surprising change of attitude. He began treating Gray with reverence, calling him Lord Gray, which made the situation somewhat awkward. It was as if he had been completely captivated by the talent he had just witnessed. Shortly after, Gray was summoned to Ariel's office and immediately assumed it had something to do with what had happened in class, maybe because of how insistent the professor had been about switching courses. As soon as he entered the room, he was surprised by a sudden attack. Reacting instinctively, he managed to defend himself, but when he looked at who had attacked him, he felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if he had seen that person somewhere before. Right after that, Ariel congratulated him, saying her intuition about him had been right. The professors present began to discuss among themselves, wondering if the girl who had attacked him, named Bella, had been holding back on purpose. Upon hearing that name, Gray remembered who she was. That was Bella Albright, a powerful sorceress he knew from his future life. And in response to the professor's comments, Ariel firmly stated that they had to be blind not to notice what they had just witnessed. In the end, the professors admitted defeat in the argument and even handed over some coins to Ariel, which initially confused Gray. Ariel then explained that they had bet on whether or not he would be able to defend himself from Bella's surprise attack. Since he won the bet, Ariel even gave him a coin as a reward, which was actually a high-value gold coin, enough to support a family of 4 for about 5 to 6 months. The professors, observing Gray's reaction, noticed an important detail. He had deliberately used his non-dominant arm to defend himself, as if protecting the other one. This raised suspicions that he might be injured. Their analysis was so precise it scared Gray, as he could not understand how they had deduced so much from just a glance. When questioned, the professor said that that level of perception was the minimum expected from someone teaching at the World Academy. Despite everything, Ariel interrupted the conversation and ordered all the professors to leave, stating that Gray was her student and that she would neither hand him over nor allow him to be pressured. The professors accepted her decision, but before leaving, one of them left an important warning. If Gray's injuries did not heal properly, he could be considered below the Academy's admission standards, which could lead to future problems. With the professors finally out of the room, Ariel turned back to Gray. She said it was time to talk about magic. While calmly sipping a cup of tea, she explained that she had already been informed about everything that happened, thanks to the professor's report. And the name of that professor really was Carlos, even though no one had mentioned it until now. He was the one who had gone directly to Ariel, insisting that Gray be transferred to the magic course. However, Ariel refused. According to her, what she had seen with her own eyes made it clear that Gray was much more suited for the sword than for magic. Furthermore, she noted that while his attack had been impressive, he did not seem truly skilled with ether compression. In fact, he did not even show signs of having trained the technique. Upon hearing this, Gray was impressed. It was clear that Ariel's divine eye lived up to its reputation, being able to perceive such specific details so easily. She then asked if Gray could explain what technique he had used. It would not be just out of curiosity, of course. There was a reason behind it. She needed to know because of the girl beside her, which Gray did not understand at first, and nearly called the girl a sorceress. Without thinking, Ariel then explained that although Bella Albright was excellent in magical theory, she had serious difficulties with practical application. She could not even properly perform basic ether compression, let alone the super compressed version. When Carlos mentioned that Gray had used the compressed technique without even channeling ether in the traditional way, Bella became extremely interested. That is why, if Gray knew how it was done, Ariel wanted him to teach her. Otherwise, Bella would be sent to Professor Bradley. Upon hearing that name, Gray panicked. In his memory, Bradley was a dangerous criminal, responsible for numerous human experiments and magical disasters that cost thousands of lives. He was known as the worst magical criminal in history. And the scariest part was that despite all that, he was still free. Ariel then revealed that if Bella were sent to him, she would undergo a surgery. Officially, it would be an operation to enhance her magical abilities. But in practice, it was just another disguised human experiment. Ariel also commented that there were details about this that had never been revealed to the public. People had died during those procedures, while others had been left broken, as Ariel herself put it, implying that some victims had completely lost their sanity or magical abilities. If Bella failed to use super compressed ether by the end of the year, she would be expelled from the academy, and there would be no choice but to send her to Bradley. Ariel had even considered sending Bella away from the academy before that happened, but at that point, it was nearly impossible to arrange. While listening to all of this, Gray reflected deeply. He knew that anything he said in that moment could alter the future, but when he looked at Bella's trembling hands, he remembered the future he needed to avoid, and with that, he made his decision. It was better to create a new future, even if uncertain, than to walk toward a known destiny where everyone died. That is why he chose to teach them both how to use the super compressed ether technique. Sometime later, in the arena, Gray began sharing all his magical knowledge. He wrote theories on the board and explained everything in detail, but he made it clear that they could not share any of that knowledge with anyone else. To guarantee that, Ariel informed them that everything had been sealed with a magical contract. If they violated its terms, the contract would kill them. As he taught, the knowledge Gray transmitted was so advanced it gave Ariel a headache. Just understanding what OD was, a mysterious energy explained by Gray, left her completely confused. Bella, on the other hand, was fascinated. Listening to those explanations, she said it felt like attending a magic lesson from hundreds of years in the future. For her, it was as if Gray's theory had advanced the history of magic by 100 years. The strangest part was that the explanations seemed to come directly from her own mind, but from a distant future in which she had not yet matured as a sorceress. Ariel, hearing all that, that, asked Bella if it made sense or if it was even real, and Bella confirmed it. Up to that point, nothing Gray had said contradicted current magical theory. On the contrary, it seemed faster to test it in practice than to keep debating. If everything Gray had explained was really true, then the spell Bella was about to test should work. Alongside the new theory he had presented, that would be the girl's true power. Gray remembered Bella Albright's full potential as a sorceress in the future, and according to his memories, her attack was powerful enough to destroy an entire city. The problem was that she still did not seem aware of that. The moment she cast her spell, it became clear that if she had truly wanted to, she could have obliterated the entire city right then. Faced with that overwhelming power, Gray was completely shocked. Fortunately, Bella managed to maintain control over her magic, which was enough to ensure no one died. She manipulated the flames with such precision that she shaped the entire spell into the form of a massive fire dragon. However, she used too much ether and lost consciousness. Even so, according to Ariel, the feat was remarkable. She had not expected Bella to be capable of such grand magic in such a short time. Even unconscious, Bella mumbled that she was not the one who was amazing, but rather the theory taught by Gray. It was thanks to that explanation that she had managed to perform the super compressed ether technique so easily. It was even a little funny to think about, because in the end, the theory was also hers, just from a distant future. What mattered now was that by mastering this technique, Bella would no longer need to undergo the surgery, and Ariel could finally speak to Professor Bradley to cancel the transfer. After all, if Bella were subjected to that surgery, she would indeed gain much more power, but it would come at the cost of control. Ariel did not know exactly how the limiter breaking process worked, but she knew that the result always went completely out of control and carried huge risks. Upon hearing this, Gray began to understand more clearly why, in his previous life, Bella was never able to master her own powers. It was the side effect of that procedure. Since Gray had fulfilled his part of the contract, it was now Ariel's turn to fulfill hers. That involved healing the protagonist's injured arm. Ariel then used an unusual type of magic, summoning several healing butterflies that surrounded Gray's arm. In a short time, he realized he could move it freely. He immediately expressed his gratitude, though he still could not understand how it had worked. Since no potion or conventional magic had been able to heal that injury, Ariel explained that her magic focused on nerve restoration, something far more advanced than simple physical healing. To confirm the effectiveness of the spell, she asked Gray to perform a few movements with his sword. He executed some strikes, but realized that his arm still did not move as well as before. Ariel had already anticipated this. According to her, although the nerves and bones had been restored, there was still a deeper wound, a wound in the soul. Gray understood what she meant, although he was still confused by the concept. Ariel explained that, even though modern magic was not yet capable of proving the existence of a soul, she firmly believed it existed. After all, with her divine eye, she could see people's souls, something that made it clear how extraordinary her power was. From what she could see, Gray's soul was still healing, slowly, and would continue to do so as long as he did not push himself beyond his limits. He could continue practicing swordsmanship with caution, but Ariel wanted to understand what could have caused such a deep spiritual wound. That was when she remembered someone who also used the soul in her swordsmanship. This person was known as Amy White, someone Gray also recognized immediately. After all, Amy White was none other than the legendary sword saint in the future. From Gray's reaction, it was clear that Ariel had not yet fully understood what she was witnessing. Gray's movements were very similar to Amy's, or perhaps even slightly superior. If compared to the future version of Amy, it was likely that with a few more years of training, she would reach the same speed as that master who had trained the protagonist. There was still some doubt about whether Gray's moves resembled Saria's or even Amy's, but the truth was that he had his own master. To avoid suspicion and not reveal too much to Ariel, he simply said he had learned it in a small dojo in his hometown. Even so, the impact of his strikes showed that it was possible to cause real damage using only swordsmanship. Ariel, however, claimed that this would be impossible with ordinary sword techniques. After all, not just any technique would allow someone to defeat an ogre general with a single blow, let alone take down other ogres and even nearby trees at the same time. This made it clear that Ariel already knew Gray was responsible for that feat, and it was precisely because of that knowledge that she had made that bet with Leon. Ariel also knew that Gray had used a mysterious power, something that came from within him. Hearing this, Gray was surprised. He did not understand how she could have noticed that, but she explained that she could see the power leaking through a kind of chain door, which indicated that her eyes could perceive much more than normal eyes. That description made it clear that Ariel had a special and perhaps unique perception. When the subject returned to Liel, Ariel mentioned that she had felt a similar power before. It was not exactly the same, but the aura was alike. Hearing this, Gray was intrigued. He wanted to understand how there could be others with powers similar to his. Ariel confirmed that yes, there were other beings with that kind of energy, but she could not say whether they were human. If he wanted to know more, she said these beings were known as the Liquidators. Upon hearing that name, Gray wondered why it was being mentioned now, when the subject was only supposed to come up in the future. Nothing made sense. Faced with Gray's confusion, Ariel asked how much he knew about the liquidators. He replied that he only knew the basics. They were extremely dangerous threats to humanity that needed to be stopped before they awakened. If that was not possible, they had to be destroyed at all costs. Ariel agreed with that view, acknowledging that the liquidators were indeed very dangerous. Even so, the researcher Balian Bradley seemed determined to continue the experiments. When he heard that name, Gray quickly understood the seriousness of the situation and wanted to know what Balian's connection to all of this was. Then, Ariel explained that the liquidator was precisely the being Balian was trying to summon. The most shocking part of it all was that Professor Bradley, someone they knew well, was involved in this plan. Until that moment, Gray had no idea that the professor was trying to create his own liquidator. Thinking more calmly, Gray began to recall something strange that had happened in his previous life. The Academy seemed to know exactly where the liquidator would appear. That could not have been a coincidence. If the Academy acted with such precision back then, maybe it was because they had been involved in the summoning from the beginning. That possibility made Gray even more concerned. That was when he said they needed to find a way to stop the experiment as soon as possible. Ariel also agreed with the urgency of the situation, but explained that she did not have the authority to interfere directly. After all, the one behind the experiment was another professor from the Academy, just like her, and because of that, she had no power to intervene directly. The only way to stop it would be if the higher-ups gave an order, but she also made it clear that she could not say who those superiors were or reveal their names. That limitation discouraged Gray for a moment, but then he remembered something important. Balian Bradley was a criminal. In fact, in Gray's previous life, the illegal experiments conducted by Balian had caused the deaths of tens of thousands of people. If they could use that information as evidence, maybe they could convince someone to stop the experiment. Gray tried to explain this to Ariel, believing he had found a loophole, but she said that would not work either. Invading a research facility controlled by an academy professor without authorization was a serious crime, and if they did that without solid official evidence, they would be treated as criminals, ending up imprisoned and making the situation even worse. Faced with all this, Gray finally understood that Ariel was fully aware of the risks and dangers involved, but her hands were completely tied. Even knowing how serious it was, she could not act on her own. They then decided to set the issue aside for a while, and Ariel suggested they talk about something else, the power that was inside Gray. More specifically, she asked if Gray had ever considered trying to control Lu, the name of that hidden power within him. That question left Gray confused. He did not even know it was possible to control something like that. Ariel admitted she did not know much about it either, but said she knew someone who might be able to help. The person's name was Heathcote Longfellows, an unusual name, but one that immediately triggered a memory in Gray. He instantly remembered who it was. That man was the one who had trained none other than the Sword Saint herself. Given that, the opportunity to learn from someone so experienced and legendary could not be wasted, so Gray accepted the invitation right away. The problem was that as soon as the training began, he was surprised by Heathcote Longfellow's approach. The initial training consisted only of running back and forth without any explanations. Even though he was excited, Gray began to doubt whether that would lead to any results. Even more so because while he ran non-stop, the teacher seemed able to read his thoughts. As soon as Gray started thinking about anything, Heathcote would already scold him with words that seemed to come out of nowhere, telling him he had to run with his whole being, with no thoughts in his head. It felt more like a strange philosophy than actual training. Throughout this whole process, Gray could not stop thinking about Bradley's experiments, which continued progressing each day. The feeling of powerlessness was constant, because while he performed seemingly simple exercises, the real danger was drawing closer. Sometime later, already in Ariel's office, she asked how the training with Heathcote was going. Gray replied that, aside from running all the time and exchanging a few quick blows at the end of each run, he was practically doing nothing else. Upon hearing that, Ariel simply commented that she had expected exactly that kind of training from Heathcote Longfellows. Suddenly, while they were talking in the office, a letter arrived for Ariel. As soon as she read the contents, her expression changed completely, revealing surprise and concern. When Gray also read the message, he understood the reason for the shock. The letter had been sent by Balian Bradley himself. According to him, the super compression technique that Bella had learned was not considered valid by the Academy, which meant that the experiment and the scheduled surgery on her had not been canceled. In practice, that was a veiled threat. It was clear that Bradley intended to force the surgery on Bella, giving her no choice. Naturally, Gray asked if Bella could not simply refuse, but Ariel explained that this was not possible. The contract she had signed was full of loopholes. The only options given were to accept the surgery or be expelled from the Academy. Faced with this, Ariel confessed that she needed Gray's help. She wanted to know where Bradley's laboratory was, because if they could get proof that he was a criminal, the contract would lose its validity and could be nullified. Gray, on the other hand, recalled that Ariel herself had previously said it was dangerous to enter a laboratory without solid evidence, but she replied that she would find a way to obtain that evidence. Moreover, she had noticed that Gray had known the location of the laboratory from the beginning. She knew this thanks to her special eyes, which seemed to see the truth even without anyone saying a word. She knew Gray was not lying, and that there was much more hidden than others could perceive. Together, they decided they would expose Bradley's crimes to the world. His laboratory was located at the top of Torowell Mountain, in an official facility authorized by the Academy, which made everything even harder to prove. It was the perfect place to maintain the appearance of legality. No professor usually interfered in another professor's business, and that explained why Bradley had chosen that location. However, if they managed to gather real evidence, they would not be accused of invading the lab. While discussing the plan, Bella suddenly appeared, saying she had also received a letter. Ariel tried to calm her, saying she did not need to worry. But Bella became even more anxious, asking if Ariel planned to face Bradley alone. Ariel, confident, said that she alone would be enough, but when she looked at Gray, she saw in his expression that he would not let that happen. He declared that he would go with her, and Ariel immediately warned that it was too dangerous. They were about to confront an academy professor, a man who had already conducted multiple experiments on humans. If they went there was no telling what they might face. Even so, Gray insisted, precisely because it was so dangerous, Ariel should not go alone. He also explained that he could use the same power he had used against the ogre general, which could be an advantage. Besides, if anything happened to Ariel, they, as students with special designation linked to the Divine Eye Project, would be expelled. Faced with both their determination, Ariel ended up agreeing, but she imposed one condition. They had to prioritize their own safety. Soon after, already standing in front of the laboratory entrance at Torowell Mountain, Bella asked if that was really the place where Bradley conducted illegal experiments. Ariel confirmed that was the place. They just needed a piece of evidence to prove it. Gray also confirmed it was the right location, and Bella, trusting them both, believed it. At that moment, Bradley was not present, as he had traveled to attend a conference of the Magic Society. With a high chance that the entrance would be filled with traps, the plan was to bypass the security by blowing up one of the side walls. Bella, somewhat hesitant, asked if that was really the right thing to do. Ariel, with an ironic tone, replied that they were already committing an invasion. Blowing up a wall would not make much difference. As she herself had said, for someone already sunk in wrongdoing, one more step did not matter. Even so, Bella insisted, asking if Ariel was sure about all of this, because she was risking too much just for her. But Gray responded, saying she was wrong. This was not just about Bella. Stopping those experiments was necessary for the good of the entire world. If they did not act now, countless people could die. Ariel replied that perhaps Gray was exaggerating a bit, but she admitted that Bradley needed to be stopped. For that reason, she assured Bella that she did not need to feel guilty. No one there was risking their life just for her. With their decisions made, Ariel, Gray, and Bella moved forward together. They blew up the side wall of the laboratory with a large explosion, even though it was anything but subtle. The original idea had been to enter discreetly, but the situation had already passed that point. And as soon as they crossed through the rubble, it became clear that they would not need to search very far for evidence. What they found inside were countless bodies, a horrific scene that made the severity of Bradley's crimes undeniable. While exploring the laboratory on Torowell Mountain, Ariel discovered 14 forbidden spells, and as the name suggested, they were spells that should never be practiced. In addition, the three also found an altar, clearly built for the purpose of performing some sort of ritual. Faced with the gravity of it all, Bella began to question what they should do. The original plan was to gather evidence and leave quietly, but now they were facing something much bigger. People might be involved, perhaps even still alive, and that made the idea of simply escaping feel insufficient. Gray, on the other hand, reminded them that they did not have much time. Bradley could return at any moment, and if he found them there, the consequences would be serious. And as if fate had heard his concern, Bradley did show up. It was almost expected, since he had claimed to be at a conference of the Magic Society. But in truth, he had only sent a substitute in his place, likely some kind of magical double or copy technique. According to him, he needed to continue an important experiment, as he had recently acquired fresh materials he intended to use quickly. In light of that, Bradley stated that he would have to adjust his plans, as the unexpected presence of Ariel, Gray, and Bella changed the scenario. The most disturbing part was hearing that he was specifically searching for individuals with higher magical density than average people. And according to him, fate had been generous, because those magical specimens had come to him willingly. No one knew about their visit to the laboratory, which meant that if they disappeared there, no one would suspect a thing. Ariel, even in the midst of the tension, asked directly if he intended to use them as test subjects, and Bradley, with disturbing calm, replied that their sacrifice would help expand the limits of magic itself, and for that reason, he would make sure they were fully utilized. But before he could say anything more, he was interrupted by a powerful fire spell launched by Bella. It was clear she would not hesitate to attack to protect everyone. However, Bradley managed to defend himself easily and commented that the Divine Eye truly deserved its reputation. As the students selected selected by Ariel were giving him more trouble than expected. He even admitted to being a little impressed with the trick Bella had shown. He then taunted her, saying she must know it was a taboo for a student to attempt to kill a professor, as if her attempt was an unforgivable crime. But in truth, he was only revealing how confident and unhinged he had become. Ariel, realizing the seriousness of the situation and understanding that the advantage was not on their side, declared that they all needed to retreat. They already had enough evidence to accuse Bradley, and there was no sense in risking themselves further. However, Bradley did not allow them to flee. Without hesitation, he cast a powerful purple-colored spell. Ariel managed to raise a defensive barrier, but the magic used was a special type, capable of devouring magical defenses easily. As soon as her first barrier fell, she tried to summon a second one, even knowing it would not last long. With time running out, Ariel handed Bella an object shaped like a magic cube. Inside it were stored the images and records that could serve as evidence. She said the item needed to be delivered to the Decent Body, a higher branch of the Academy that could judge Bradley's actions impartially. Bella's mission was to escape with that cube and ensure the truth would be revealed. But going against the orders of her own teacher, Bella refused to run away. She summoned a powerful magical barrier surrounding all three of them. Seeing this, Ariel panicked, begging them to escape. That was the condition under which she had allowed them to accompany her there. The plan was for Gray and Bella to retreat if things got out of control, and now, faced with an enemy like Bradley, that condition was being broken. Despite the growing tension, Bella's actions spoke louder than any words. The barrier she had created was able to withstand the magical impact that had easily destroyed Ariel's previous one. That surprised not only Ariel, but also Bradley himself, as the theory behind that barrier was based on the anti-magic of the devouring flame, something that should only be known by a very restricted group of people. No one outside that elite circle of scholars should have been able to use it. And yet, there was Bella, holding the barrier firm. Faced with that, Bradley immediately demanded to know who had taught her such a thing. Bella firmly replied that she had recently learned a new theory from someone, but refused to reveal any further details. She only said it was a student from the swordsmanship course. And from there, everything became a secret that made the professor even more furious. He would not tolerate that kind of betrayal within the academy. So, without hesitation, he pulled a strange stone from his cloak and declared that, in light of such defiance, he would burn them all. By smashing the stone against the ground, a new spell was activated. Several magical skulls appeared along with the flames, greatly reinforcing the attack Bella's barrier still held. But the real problem was her mana, which was beginning to run out. Meanwhile, Ariel, using the Divine Eye, managed to locate a weak point within Bradley's magic. She tried to launch a targeted attack against that spot, but the devouring flame absorbed any spell that came near, completely nullifying her attempts. And from what Gray remembered about all the professors, Ariel was one of the least offensively capable in direct combat. The situation only grew worse. Bella's mana was running dry, and the three of them were now trapped inside the very barrier protecting them. That was when Gray, seeing all of it, stepped forward in front of the others. He declared that this time he would attack himself. It was better to try something than let them all die together. In Bradley's field of vision, a red aura began to manifest around Gray's energy. Suddenly, the perception of space seemed to invert. Before Bradley could even react, his neck had been sliced. Not only that, Gray's strike tore through everything in its path, destroying the ceiling, the structures, and anything in the way. The impact was so violent that even Ariel, though surprised, had to stop debris from falling on them. She watched closely and, for the first time, said she was seeing that power with her own eyes. It was completely terrifying. The attack didn't just cut the enemy, it sliced through everything in the path of the blade. It was as if reality itself had been torn apart. After that, Gray commented that his dominant arm was hurting a lot. He felt tingling and numbness, but could still move his fingers. That was already progress. It showed his body was adapting to the power. If it had been in earlier times, like back when he was still training in the village, he would have passed out and remained unconscious for days. Just like what had happened before, still, it was impressive how that simple running training was working so well. Ariel had several questions, but decided to leave them for later. She took the chance to apologize to Gray. She felt like she had forced him to use that power he was supposedly meant to avoid. But Gray replied that it was fine. After all, he had already said he would only use it if it was truly necessary, and that moment had demanded it. Even so, according to Ariel, he should not use that power again for a while. If he kept overusing it, the damage could become permanent and irreversible. Interrupting their conversation, Bella asked a direct question. She wanted to know what kind of magic that was, because no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't sense anything at all. It was as if it wasn't a regular spell, and indeed, explaining it merely as sorcery was impossible. Ariel, with seriousness, asked Bella to drop the subject. She said that if Bella insisted, she would have to erase her memories. That was enough for Bella to understand they were dealing with something much deeper than it seemed. Because of that, she proposed a magical contract so she could have the right to keep and know part of the truth. After signing the contract, Gray commented that although he was worried about the people affected by the experiments, the more urgent matter at that moment was helping protecting those who were still alive and unconscious inside. Even though they were no longer in immediate danger, Ariel explained that the best thing to do was to take the survivors to the Academy's medical facilities. However, since there were many unconscious people at the site, and the area was still unstable due to the previous destruction, she decided to protect each one of them with small individual barriers. These barriers would ensure their safety in case something happened, like a piece of debris falling from the ceiling. That would allow them to keep investigating the area with more peace of mind. Looking more closely at the surroundings, they realized that most of the installations were related to human sacrifices. The rituals were meant to create magical catalysts, or even enhance mages' abilities through dark methods. It was revolting. However, despite all those crimes, they had yet to find any direct evidence of the liquidator, which started to bother Gray. He clearly remembered that in his previous life, everything had started from that place. It was from there that Bradley unleashed the disaster that killed tens of thousands of people. After thinking for a bit, Gray recalled an important detail. What actually caused the mass deaths in his previous world was not a direct spell, but a deadly miasma that had emerged from underground. That meant the real danger was not on the surface of the lab, but beneath them. With that in mind, Gray asked Ariel if she could see anything under the floor in that area. At first, she detected nothing. However, when activating her divine eye, she managed to spot a trace of teleportation magic approximately 300 meters below the ground. At that depth, theoretically, there should be nothing but rock, dirt, and more dirt. But upon opening a portal using the magical trace, they were transported to a completely different place. The underground space was immense, like a hidden complex of installations filled with small structures that looked like capsules or cocoons. Bella, observing the area, commented that the Aether density there was absurd, especially concentrated in a round structure at the center of that underground chamber. Ariel, once again using her divine eye, confirmed there was a strange energy coming from that center, and that energy was unmistakable. It was the power of the liquidator. It was a kind of force that did not seem to follow any normal magical rule. Although the name liquidator always caused some confusion, something between destruction and even the sound of a household appliance, the fact was that the threatening presence was real and already active. Inside the central structure, they found a ritualistic door surrounded by inscriptions and symbols in purple. There was a clear attempt at containment or activation there. In the rest of the area, there was nothing else. No trace of the liquidator, no creatures, no living presence. That door seemed to be the only clue. Ariel calmly approached the door and began to analyze it. According to her, the danger was not in the door itself, but in the purple magical devices surrounding the circle that enveloped it. And since she was already expecting some kind of reaction, she was not alarmed when the symbols suddenly began to glow. Gray and Bella were startled by the sudden activation of the magic, but Ariel remained calm. According to her reading, the activation would cause only a rupture in space, something that had already been predicted. The distortion in the environment really did happen, as if space had cracked for a moment. But in the end, the activation attempt failed. And Ariel, who had already foreseen that result, explained that those purple seals were not created to summon the liquidator, but rather for something different, something unfinished or perhaps poorly made. They had only opened a small rift to where he existed, and the medium used to access that power was the core located at the center, which used human life as a crystallizer of energy. That meant that probably the people seen at the beginning had been sacrificed just to carry out that small ritual. Bella, upon that discovery, wanted to understand what exactly they intended to do with such a dangerous power. Ariel explained that the same type of energy had already been seen before, like in the black flame used by Varian Teal, and in the crystal that had strengthened his attack. In short, that catalyst was not limited to manipulating fire, but amplified the power of any kind of magic. In truth, Bradley's plan from the beginning was never to summon the liquidator. That only happened by accident in the future. His real objective was to obtain the power that emanated from the rift, because that power altered the structure of known spells. The magic circles built around the door had reached their limit, which was why the ritual failed. Even so, just by looking at the equipment, it was clear how absurdly valuable it all was. It was estimated that each of those purple tubes was worth the equivalent of an entire nation. Ariel, while analyzing everything, began to suspect that a larger organization was behind it all. Bella asked if it could be the Empire of Isgar, but Ariel denied it, stating that although the Empire was the most powerful in the world, it would not have the magical or financial resources needed to create something of that magnitude. The only entity capable of surpassing even the Empire in magical research was the World Union Academy. The revelation shocked Bella, as it made no sense to believe that the Academy could be involved in something like that. After all, that institution existed precisely to protect the world from threats, not to create them. Gray, reflecting on the matter, questioned whether this meant the entire Academy was their enemy. In his memory, in the previous timeline, the Academy's elite forces had been the main defenders on the front lines against the Liquidator, which showed that, at the very least, not everyone there was evil. Ariel then explained explained that most of the academy truly acted in the name of humanity, but that did not mean everyone within it could be trusted. There were countless researchers and secret facilities, unknown even to many internal members. Looking at the place, it was evident that Bradley had received major support. The problem was figuring out from whom. In other words, it was not possible to fully trust the academy. Moreover, many of those involved in such experiments probably believed they were acting for the greater good, which made everything even more dangerous. Even if the truth were revealed, it would easily be buried in the shadows. Gray, intrigued, asked Ariel if she knew who had created that magic circle. She used the divine eye and noticed there were no communication devices nor traces of magic that could identify the creator, which made it clear that it was someone extremely skilled. While they were talking, a massive explosion began to shake the place. Everything around them was destroyed in a matter of seconds. It became evident that this was a mechanism designed to eliminate evidence, programmed to erase any trace of the experiment. Bella, desperate, begged Ariel to stop thinking in theories and flee before they all died. But Ariel, calm and confident, replied that professors from the World Union Academy were not weak enough to die in a situation like that. After making that statement, Ariel created a massive magic circle that enveloped the entire surrounding area. Before the structure collapsed on them, the spell was activated, and everyone was teleported, including the people she had protected earlier. As soon as they arrived safely, Gray questioned whether that had not been too risky. Ariel responded calmly that the reason for the delay in casting the teleportation spell was the extra weight, since she was taking several people along. Still, she assured them that by showing those mysterious tubes to the academy, no one would be able to ignore what they had discovered. Sometime later, in the director's office, Alexander, the acting head of the World Union Academy, informed them that the survivors were receiving treatment in the medical wing and thanked the group for locating the illegal experiments conducted by Bradley. He examined the purple tubes and confirmed that the value of each one was absurdly high. Ariel, intrigued, wanted to know how Bradley had managed to get his hands on something so expensive and restricted. Alexander explained that those artifacts were stolen goods intercepted during a high-security transport operation, which had ended with the deaths of 78 agents. The revelation made Ariel remember an incident that had happened 15 years earlier, and Alexander confirmed that it was the same case. That event involved an organization known as the Blood Drinker, considered the largest criminal network in the world. Gray recognized the name immediately and fell silent upon realizing the scale of the problem. Bella, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, as she discovered that the same organization had been responsible for the death of her parents. The group was left in shock upon realizing that they were dealing with an entity so powerful that not even the Academy knew where it was hiding. Even when one of its members was eliminated, new ones quickly appeared, as if they multiplied unnaturally. Ariel suspected that the influence of the Blood Drinker had already infiltrated the Academy itself. Even so, Alexander stated that there was nothing they could do about it. This infuriated Gray, who could not accept the fact that everyone knew the truth and still remained powerless. Ariel explained that this was how the Academy operated nowadays. The institution's motto claimed that anyone with talent could become stronger, regardless of lineage, race, gender, or past, that included criminals as long as they had power. Bella, outraged, said that made no sense, since criminals should be punished, not rewarded. Alexander himself agreed with her, which only increased the group's confusion. After all, if he was the director, why didn't he take action? He then explained that he was actually just a substitute, a public figure with limited authority. The real power within the Academy was in the hands of more influential people. According to Alexander, there was a senior student among the older ranks who had enough influence to change the course of the entire Academy. If any of them could become stronger than that senior, they might be able to change things from the inside out. In short, within the Academy, power was everything. As he spoke, Alexander reflected internally on what had happened. He doubted that Ariel had enough strength to defeat Bradley, so he wondered who had truly caused his downfall. In the end, he concluded that regardless of which of the two was responsible, the sharp and determined look in Ariel's eyes showed that she still possessed the same spark as before. He could hardly wait to see what those two would become and what kind of monsters might emerge from them. Sometime later, as Gray walked through the halls of the World Union Academy, he reflected on how much stronger he still needed to become in order to change the future and prevent the tragedies of his past life from repeating. Lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into a boy who, without any warning, tried to kick him in the face. Gray managed to react in time, blocking the attack, but was pushed back by the impact. Confused, he tried to understand the reason for the aggression, and the boy simply asked why he walked around as if he owned the place, saying that a reject from the special admission program should not be wandering the halls freely. Upon hearing that, Gray immediately realized it was another one of those students who hated the special program candidates. The boy, with black hair and an arrogant expression, seemed eager to start trouble, but when he saw Ariel approaching, he backed off immediately and walked away. As he left, he muttered something about surveillance being stricter than usual and mentioned the name Varen, saying he would send someone soon, which left Gray intrigued. Shortly after, Ariel arrived and asked what had happened. Gray explained the situation, and she commented that since the attacker had not used any weapons or magical equipment, she officially could not take any action. Still, with a touch of irony, she said that if Gray wanted to deal with it himself, she could not see anything. He refused, preferring to avoid unnecessary conflict. Curious, Ariel asked if the students from the special admission program were really that hated. Gray replied that most of the time, the provocations were limited to comments and mockery, but that had been the first time the hostility escalated to physical aggression. Faced with that, Ariel apologized, saying that if she had more authority within the academy, they would not be going through that situation. Gray, however, said he did not mind, because without her help, he would not have even made it into the institution. Besides, he believed that Bella and the other students chosen by Ariel would prove that the Divine Eye Project was not a mistake. Ariel was moved by his words, but also warned him not to treat the situation as if it were just someone else's problem. She said that, among all the students under her guidance, it was Gray from whom she expected the most. Upon hearing that, Gray felt a huge weight on his shoulders, as he knew he was being compared to the members of the legendary group known as the Heroes of Humanity. However, he himself acknowledged the irony of that, since that very group had once been defeated with a single blow from the Liquidator in the past. Moreover, no one yet knew who the real mastermind behind that entire calamity was. Setting those thoughts aside, Gray went to his next class, swordsmanship practice. There, the students were supposed to pair up according to a list posted on the board. He knew that this was his chance to prove he could keep up with the regular students and begin shedding the scorn he faced for being part of the special admission program. The problem was that Gray's partner ended up being none other than Leon, the best student in the swordsmanship course. In addition to being extremely talented, Leon had already shown a certain contempt for students in the special admission program, and the difference in level between the two was staggering. When he entered the room, Leon appeared happy to have been assigned as Gray's partner, but the smile on his face did not seem friendly. Internally, Leon was excited to finally show his true swordsmanship against Gray, while the protagonist interpreted that smile as a provocation, thinking he was happy to be able to attack him legally during training. Shortly after, the class began, and the pairs were called to fight each other. On Gray's side, the clash was intense from the beginning. Leon moved forward with precise and aggressive strikes, keeping total control of the pace, while Gray did his best to dodge, defend, and counterattack when he had the chance. The difference between them was huge. Leon had refined technique, elegant movements, and far superior physical strength, which made each of his attacks hard to endure. Even so, Gray held on longer than anyone expected, thanks to the intense training he had received from Professor Heathcote. Still, he was already gasping for air while Leon remained almost untouched, showing no sign of exhaustion. Remembering the lessons he had learned, Gray decided to fight as if it were a real life-and-death battle. So when Leon came in with another direct strike, Gray dodged at the last second and counterattacked with a precise thrust to his leg, catching him completely by surprise. Even injured, Leon refused to give up and tried to turn the tables. But Gray, taking advantage of the moment, managed to corner him. In the end, both were left in advantageous positions, pointing their swords at each other. It was considered a draw, but Leon, with a satisfied smile, admitted he would have lost if Gray had not held back the final strike. Gray, in turn, commented that even with the protection spell active, it still felt strange to point a blade at a classmate's heart. Leon then said he finally understood the difference between them, and that fighting was not just about swordsmanship technique, but also about the determination and mindset of the one holding the sword. Gray tried to downplay the result by saying he had kind of cheated with that surprise strike, but Leon replied that it did not matter, since the professor had made it clear they were supposed to fight as if it were a real battle. In the end, Leon made it clear he wanted a rematch. Gray hesitated, knowing that another fight against him would inevitably end in defeat. But before he could answer, another student suddenly appeared, interrupting the class. He began mocking Gray, saying he should not even be there, and was only acting confident because he had some magical power. It was a pointless provocation that only served to irritate the others. Leon, however, stepped in, placing himself between the two, and stating that he was the only one authorized to fight Gray. Since the professor had already assigned the pairs, no one had the right to interfere. The professor, observing the situation, said he would adjust the pairs according to each student's power level to ensure the next matches would be more balanced. Gray did need to face Leon, but before that, another young man appeared, saying he wanted to fight Leon. However, to do so, he would have to beat Gray first, since the two were said to be at a similar level of strength. The boy accepted immediately, almost certain of his victory. Internally, Leon found it amusing that the boy was so confident, even though he was underestimating Gray the same way Leon had done before. Still, Leon was annoyed because that boy had interrupted his direct fight with Gray, and it made him so angry he started to lose his composure. Meanwhile, the professor approached Gray to ask if he disliked the rules of real combat. In that type of fight, anything was allowed, as if they were truly fighting for their lives. However, since it was just a swordsmanship class, the fight should be limited to the use of swords only, with controlled attacks and no magic. Observing his opponent, Gray quickly realized that he was at a disadvantage in terms of physical build. Even so, he decided to fight. He was not very confident, but he was also not used to giving up. He figured it would be a good experience. So, since he was there, he would not back down. As soon as the fight began, Gray blocked the first strike just to test his opponent's strength, and immediately found it strange how easily he managed to deflect the attack. The other boy did not seem to have anything special. To confirm, Gray delivered a second strike, and to his surprise, nearly knocked his opponent down in a brutal manner. He had actually thought the other student would be able to dodge it, since the attack was not even that fast. But apparently, it had been too fast after all. Even while bleeding and lying on the ground, the boy stood up and said he would not accept that defeat. He asked for another chance, but ended up getting beaten again without being able to react, like a punching bag. With the fight over, the practical swordsmanship class also came to an end. The chosen representatives of the class were Gray and Leon. Gray was confused and asked what exactly it meant to be a representative. The professor explained that every year there was a kind of internal competition between classes, where the best students from the first year faced off against the best from the second year. Until that moment, the first years had lost 35 times in a row. But after seeing Gray and Leon's skills up close, the professor had a feeling that this year could be very different.